That being said, like Diginsona said, these are the holy translators. You're supposed to say it like that. Holy translators. So we took this picture a few months ago for the book. I didn't make it because it wasn't the right format, but it was the perfect picture. There's me in the middle. We're in front of the Abkarian building over there. There's the Mamik Babik in the back. I have 4 male students on my right, 4 female students on my left. And the symmetry is perfect, the balance is perfect, but someone was missing. Anna was absent that day. So when I wanted to put this as the picture, and so I had to Photoshop her in. There's Anna right there. But that throws off the balance. The symmetry is not there. And so there's a little bit of room next to Mark over here. So I had to Photoshop someone else in who played a really key role in the translation. And by including them, I would really like to say thank you, Tyrannosaurus Rex, for your dedication, and your hard work, and your laser eyes, which kept those pesky, time-traveling velociraptors at bay long enough for us to translate this very important book. I went overboard. I know I went overboard, but I thought since I'd gone overboard, I'd go all the way. And so Marina Manvelian, who's right next to Anna, she's not here today. She had a dental appointment. It's prom tomorrow. So I gave everybody something in Photoshop. I gave her a halo and a pair of wings. And then the triplets over there, Jennifer Hazarian, Lilith Akopian, and Mukhs, as we call her, I gave them all a fashionable set of sunglasses. And then Noy Hovagimian there, Noy, the golden boy, Hovagimian. I gave him only what was fitting, a crown made of gold and a scepter, which he deserves, absolutely. And then Shant Melkonian next to him. Shant would disappear to Texas every once in a while. I don't know why, I don't know what was in Texas, so I gave him a cowboy hat and a lasso. Can't really see it that far, but Arthur Atanesian, who's also not here, he must have had something important to do. His face is obscured by the lower half of T-Rex's jaw, so the only thing I could do is I gave him a really long neck. Yeah. And then here, Mark Barselian, who really took everything I was saying the whole year really seriously, because I would say, after we do this, we're going to be immortal. We're going to be immortalized. We're going to be immortal. We're going to be immortal. And then he took that really seriously. And then he went around and he's been annoying Baron Kevork since. On Mahatzank, on Mahatzank. So I gave him a sandwich board with his favorite words on it. So this is us. These are the holy trends. Oh, and then there's me too. The lasers are passing too close to my head, so my hair catches on. But so this is us. These are the holy translators. And so a little bit about the course. There's an Italian proverb. It's tradutori traditori, which means translators are traitors. Italians are not very kind to translators. They think every translation betrays the original. Our people, on the other hand, have taken the exact opposite point of view. For Armenian culture and for Armenian history, translators are holy, and we have a holy day devoted to them. Sut Tarkmanchas Don. And so, I don't know, Italians think translators are traitors, Armenians think they're holy. Does that mean that Armenians are more tolerant towards traitors in their midst? I don't think so. I don't think so. What I think is that Armenians living between East and West and North and South have gained familiarity with both sides and then try to explain both to both. I think it's a natural result of our geography. And so I came up with a motto of my own. It's not tradutori, it's traditori, like the Italians say. I say in Armenian, takmanich pergich.
Yeah.
Because considering the state that Armenian literature is in, which is, let's face it, it's unread. Most of the world doesn't even know it about Armenian literature. And so translators, when they translate a work from Armenian to English, they really are saving those works. And by spreading them across the 4 corners of the earth, they really, really are saving them. So we would do well to stick with our point of view and say, takmanich pergich. And so I created this translation course, which is the first of its kind for that purpose. And that could be our motto for next year, Tak Manic for each on a logo. But, and it was unprecedented, no one's ever done it, I'm the first. And so it's so unprecedented that for 6-7 months, they had no official name. And so in the official campus portal, it was simply called Hratch class. I didn't Photoshop that, that's real. It was called Hratch class because I pitched it and people were like, I don't know, Hratch was doing something. So the whole point is that what I wanted to do is we teach Armenian and we preserve Armenian, but what I wanted to do is combine English and Armenian in one class for the benefit of both. Every Armenian American here, their English is 2-3 times as good as their Armenian. They speak English with one another, that's the same thing I did. But when you translate a work from one language to another, it strengthens your weaker one by pulling it up to the level of your stronger language. And by going back and forth, it really does lift it up. It creates a bridge between your dominant language to your less dominant language. And that's what we tried to do. And like we said, it's available on Amazon, like Digin Sona said, worldwide. Everybody can buy it. Someone in China and Australia and Bangladesh, everywhere. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to preserve Armenian literature by propagating it. Not by just keeping it to ourselves. We want to spread it to the four corners of the earth. But I also wanted to make a bold claim. Mesrop Mashdots was mentioned earlier. I'm going to say that, make this statement, that the work of me and my students is just as important, if not a teeny tiny bit more important, than the work of Mesrop Mashdots and his students. And I'll back that up with evidence. And in order to demonstrate, we have our very first entry from my ledger, which will be acted out, I don't know to what degree it's going to be successful, but by Shant and Mark, who are a pair of Armenian men sitting in a theater, and they are sitting in the adjacent box next to Noy, who's going to be playing the part of a Greek, and Anna of an Armenian woman. Okay, so keep your eyes on them. I'll be the narrator. Okay. This is Baronian, the scene. One of the box seats at the theater in Pera. Pera is a very wealthy neighborhood of Constantinople. The dishonorable wife of an honorable man was flirting with a Greek. Look, said someone sitting in the adjacent box to his friend.
Is it proper for the wife of an honorable man to be unfaithful to her husband?
You're right,
replied the friend.
It's xenophilia that destroys our nation, isn't it?
That was pretty good, not bad. Okay, good. All right. So the word that Baronian uses here, he harps on this point over and over again through my ledger and all of his works. The word I translated as xenophilia is odarasiruchun, and the Armenian is odarasiruchunne vormer aska gakante. And so I had to coin the word xenophilia because in English we hear xenophobia all the time. Xenophobia, which means the fear or hatred of foreign things. In Armenia, we've had the opposite problem because, again, of our geographical location. Xenophilia, love, undue love of foreign or exotic things has been our problem for a very long time. Mashdots and his students translated foreign scriptures into Armenian to spread foreign ideas. They're not Armenian ideas. This is me backing up my point. We have translated an Armenian work of one of our own men of genius to spread to the world. He was importing, we're exporting. And then Baronian, he again talks about xenophilia or odarasiruchun. He criticizes Armenian theater goers for attending performances only if they feature a pretty actress. And Baronian writes the following. Is it even possible for the Armenian theater to flourish when the actresses are Armenian, but the presentation's foreign? And then Baronian goes on to say that only 1 out of 100 Armenians who attended the theater actually go to watch the play, while 99 out of 100 go to ogle these beautiful actresses. And he adds, he says, what benefit will even that one person derive from a performance which contains nothing from Armenian life and experience? These were usually from Paris. They were set in Paris or some other European capital, which had different problems, different experiences, different histories, different characters, different inclinations, and had nothing to do with what Armenians were experiencing in the Ottoman Empire or under the Russian Empire even. So, as I said, we are translating one of the works of our men of genius to spread to the world. And we, me and my holy translators, we are not spreading the Gospels of Jerusalem. We're not spreading the Gospels of Athens. We're not spreading the Gospels of Rome or of Moscow or of Washington, D.C. or any other place. We are spreading the Gospels of Armenia. And then we, I think, can say with a bit more justification, behold, we bring you tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. Especially because we translated Baronian, and it brings people joy sometimes. All right, and so the front cover, everyone's seen the front cover, so I'll do this quick. Every single picture I've ever seen of Baronian has been black and white and grainy. This is the best one, but it's a sketch. This one is from Wikipedia, and trust me, I know from experience, it's been photoshopped. It's not an actual background, it's a gradient. I don't know where that's from. No one knows where it's from. You look at where the attribution is, it says source unknown. And then once in a while, you'll see something like this. Where did this come from? It looks like it's film and it's been warped. You'll see something like this on a stamp, but no one's ever seen Baronian the way we have shown Baronian on the front cover in full color. The first thing people say to me when they see this is, wow, he had blue eyes. Yes, he did have blue eyes. Their second question is, how do you know he had blue eyes? Because they've been looking at those pictures, their whole lives. His contemporaries tell us. They describe him as a tall, long-necked man with a Hellenic nose, slightly squinting blue eyes, who cared so much for his moral principles that he was totally indifferent toward his appearance. And so I worked with I found an artist, she's an Eastern European, and so when I gave her the description, I gave her these references, and I said, also he has blue eyes, and then she sent me this color picture. Oh, and I said he has to be laughing, of course, because it looks like he's really grim in all these pictures. And then she gave him Eastern European blue eyes and not Armenian blue eyes. But I liked it so much. His eyes were probably as blue as noise, not as blue as that, but it's better than the things we've been looking at up until now. And then his laughter. Why is he laughing? At the beginning of my ledger, he says the following: though I'm no merchant, Noy mentioned this, I decided to keep a ledger and to make entries in it of daily occurrences, and to occasionally go back and laugh at the faults of mankind. Let the tears flowing from the eyes of Heraclitus make rivers. Let Armenian poets depict the eyes of Armenia as the Tigris and Euphrates and cry. And let them inspire Mr. Chukhajian to compose melodies to cry to. I, gentlemen, I laugh. And to laugh, I neither require melodies nor a piano. Crying over faults is the greatest of faults. To shed tears over misfortunes means we have no blood to shed. Tears are for children and women, grown-up children. I beg you, leave to them what's theirs. So that's why he's shown the way he is. He's holding the very book that he's written, and he's laughing at our faults, and the faults of mankind. You'll notice that he's made quite a sexist remark at the end, calling women grown-up children, and in women's, it's Women's History Month too. So, but I want to tell you something. Also in the preface, he says that he doesn't take sides and he's completely impartial, because he says, "Thank God I have no friends to be partial toward," and then he follows that up with, "But don't think I'll be speaking polemically, because thank Satan," that's what he says, "thank Satan, I don't have any enemies either." And then in some editions, the thank Satan's been removed, and so he's still censored to this day. But he did it for the joke, the symmetry of the joke. If you're thanking God for no friends, who are you going to thank for not having enemies? So, and then he goes on. This is his whole method. Baronian never gave any sort of positive advice for how people should act. He never did that. Instead, he So he doesn't give us virtues to follow, he laughs at vices. He does it in a reverse way. He says to laugh at vices presumes we are on the road to virtue, and on that account, the more laughs I get, the less vice I'll find. And so while he often cites philosophers and their philosophical ideas, as we just saw, he mentioned Heraclitus. Baronian, neither in my ledger nor in anywhere else, put forward any philosophy in a positive way, but only in that negative way. Negative meaning he shows us what not to do as opposed to what we should do. I won't read that thing about Plato. We've gone over a little bit, so I'll skip ahead. But Plato agrees that satirists don't tell you what to do, but it's important that they show you vices so you know what to avoid. So, if you hear or see anything that I say from this point on, don't blame me. I didn't say it. Hagop Baronian said it, so get angry at him, blame him. Okay? Not me, blame him.
Hey, don't you blame me?
Who said that?
Me. I said it.
Hagop? Hagop Baronian? Is that you?
Yes, it is I.
Wow. Wait, you speak English?
Yes, I do. In addition to Armenian, Greek, Italian, French, and Turkish, I knew enough English to read Shakespeare plays in their original language. Would you like me to recite a passage for you and the audience gathered here?
That would be amazing, sir, yes.
Very well. The following is from Act 2, Scene 2 of Shakespeare's All's Well That Ends Well. It is like a barber's chair that fits all buttocks. The pin buttock, the quatch buttock, the brawn buttock, or any buttock.
Okay, we believe you, Hagop. We believe you. You speak English. Please don't continue. But I'm sorry, you were saying something before that whole buttock thing. What were you saying?
Ah, yes. What I was saying was, don't blame me. I was only a mirror. Mirrors reflect only that which happens to pass in front of them. When a diminutive little dwarf waddles by a mirror, what mirror shows you a tall, heroic Achilles in its reflection? Or which mountain echo will return the word Satan if the word spoken at the moment is saint? I only reflected and echoed what I saw and heard from you, O Armenian people. If you seek someone to blame for what you find in my books, you will do well to first and foremost and only blame yourselves.
My apologies, Baron Baronian. That is very wise advice. Are there any other wise words you'd like to leave us with?
Yes, buttocks.
Oh, come on, Hagop. Come on, Hagop. He said it. Trying to get me. Alright, so the title of the book is Translators in Armenian. It's never been translated into English, but people who have translated it for the sake of discussing it in English have usually translated it as My Notebook. Hagop Baronian translates it as My Notebook. But My Notebook isn't quite right, as Elizabeth mentioned earlier. Translators is a very specific type of notebook. Translators, we saw in the beginning where he said, though I'm no merchant, I decided to keep a ledger at Translators. That gives you a clue that it's something more particular than just a regular school notebook or a notebook that you write your diary in. Ledger, as opposed to notebook, has both meanings. Ledger could mean a book for keeping notes or a record book of any kind, and it also means a book for keeping accounts. So merchants keep ledgers, merchants keep tseraded, and that was, and it's not a small thing. If you go look on Baronian's Wikipedia, you'll see among his famous works, it'll say honorable beggars, in the English, honorable beggars, national big shots, and then it'll say my ledger. That's not because it already existed. We did that. We went onto the Wikipedia article and we put my ledger in it. So if you see it, we did that. So not only were we the first to translate it, we're the first to translate it correctly into English. And actually give this its proper title. And like Elizabeth said, this was their first lesson in how one word so easily could be translated into multiple different words, but there's always a best word that fits the exact circumstance. However, most people know this in Armenian as hos-hosi tseradedra, which, where did that come from? Baronian clearly calls it im tseradedras. Rachel Goshkarian, who's a professor at Lafayette College, translates it in an essay as notes on this and that, on the idea that hos-hos supposedly means hosteren honderen paner desads kurads, which that is not what it means. That is completely wrong. Hos-hos, here's what it looks like on Digilib, hos-hos itzeradedra. Hos-hos is actually a slur for Western Armenians. It's the equivalent of gorgor, but in the 19th century. So an equivalent would be, for a linguistic slur, would be people who are ignorant in Chinese, when they call a Chinese person a ching chong, as offensive as that is, that's how offensive it was to call a Western Armenian a hos-hos. But for 100 years, we've been calling this hos-hos itzeradedra, and so calling in tseradedras hos-hos itzeradedra is like calling the analects of Confucius the analects of Ching Chong. How did that come to be? I'll tell you in a second. The word Armenia couldn't appear in print in the Ottoman Empire when Baronian was alive. And so this is from the November 15, 1880 entry, where the Ottoman government has banned the word Armenia even the word from appearing. And so no political works criticizing the Ottoman government or advocating for Armenia were allowed. So Baronian had to send his, in Tseradedra is very political. So he had to send it to be published in Georgia, which was under the Russian Empire. And he could say whatever he wanted about the Ottoman government without fearing persecution or censorship. And so it was published in Abkar Hovanesyan's Ports, which was a journal at the time, short-lived. But Baronian, still fearing that people would know he wrote this book, it was very dangerous to do so, he undersigned it, not with his name. Even in the Russian Empire, he was afraid he would get back that he wrote this, so he would undersign it hos-hos. Everyone knew he wrote it, but just to be safe, he used that pen name. The editor of Ports said, from now and then for many months after this, we're going to be publishing the diary of hos-hos in these pages. And then, although it was still called In Tseradedra, a later editor, Eastern Armenian editor, just took it upon themselves to rename his book from In Tseradedras to hos-hos Tseradedra. Even though Baronian, when he called himself hos-hos, he was making fun of them making fun of him. It was a double, I don't know what you call it. Like if someone called me an idiot, I would remember that, I wouldn't say anything, and then a week later, I would say something and they'd say, oh, that's smart. And I would say, oh yeah, no, not really, I'm an idiot, right? That's what he was doing. He was calling himself the slur to make fun of the people who use the slur. It's a normal thing that happens. And as a satirist, that's what he was doing. But it's stuck, and we've been using that east, west. People have forgotten what hos-hos means, and we've been using it for 150 years. But its actual title is In Tseradedras, which translates to my ledger. So we could put that to rest. No more hos-hos Tseradedra. I have a question. I started there year off with a question. And this question, so I pose a question. There's a reason for this. I pose a question in order to expose a problem, in order to propose a philosophy, in order to have a philosophical framework in which to understand Baronian. Because if you ask me, Baronian's never been fully understood, ever, by anyone, I think. You tell me if I'm wrong, I don't know. So, just long story short, this question is going to help us understand Baronian better. Okay, I know it's a long chain of events, but this question is going to help us understand what Baronian wrote better. So stay with me. It's going to seem like it's not connected, Here's the question. Who is the most famous Armenian in the history of the world? I asked them this last year, and then Arthur, who's not here, he said, Dikran the Great. He raised his hand, Dikran the Great, which is a good answer for, it's the type of answer you tell someone that they think that you want to hear. And so I said, Arthur, really, is Dikran the Great the most famous Armenian in the history of the world? And then he thought about it, he's like, nah. I was like, do they know Dikran the Great in Bangladesh and in Australia? The common person knows Dikran the Great? He's like, nah, probably not. This year, someone in this year's class said, William Saroyan. I said, really, you think William Saroyan is the most famous Armenian in the history of the world, our 3,000-year history? William? Maybe in 1933 in America, but William Saroyan, really? And they're like, nah, maybe not. And then I was talking to someone else, and they said, Charles Aznavour. I said, maybe in France, but is Charles Aznavour the most famous Armenian in the history of the world? Charles Aznavour? It's overrated. Who is it?
Who? Kim Kardashian.
It's her, and it's not even close.
Nice.
And that is the problem exposed by the question. That is the problem. Okay? So the question exposed the problem. Partly it's a fluke of history because she was born at a time where the internet existed and the whole world's connected and pictures travel across the earth at light speed. Maybe that accounts for it if you want to make yourself feel better. But that's, I think, people with similar antiquity to us, Greeks and Persians, for example, all their most famous people are from antiquity. Who's the most famous Greek? Alexander the Great, Plato, Aristotle. Who's the most famous Persian? Cyrus the Great, Zoroaster, Xerxes. Our most famous person in the history of the world is someone who was born yesterday, who's my age, and is not famous for anything good. So, soul searching is necessary. Soul searching is necessary. We have to really look at ourselves. To answer why this is bad, we need a philosophy. Because people, I think, instinctively feel, you're like, oh, I don't like the fact that she's the most famous Armenian in the history of the world. But why? To answer this, we have to have a philosophy, which I don't think we have as a people. In answering this question, we'll be able to fully understand my ledger. And Baronian's criticisms, which are very similar to what I've been saying. So don't blame me, blame him. And so, when I said we need to do some soul searching, I meant that literally. We have to look at the structure of the human soul. I'm not kidding. I know I'm trying to speak philosophy in front of a crowd of Armenians, and every Armenian knows everything I know, but let's pretend like you don't. This is the structure, so this is the philosophy I introduced to them. It's from Plato and Aristotle, Plato divided the human soul into three parts. And just again, it's just for a philosophical framework, just to help us out, okay? Plato said the human soul is divided into three parts. Aristotle categorizes souls from in what he calls a great chain of being, from the least complex souls to the most complex souls. So the inert matter is at the bottom, and then you get like simple plant life, and then you get animals, and then human beings, and then God, according to Aristotle, the most complex soul. So I combined those for this model I'm about to show you. So Plato said that the largest part of the human soul, he calls it epithemia, or appetite. These are our appetites for food and reproduction. The seat of the appetite is the belly, the stomach, according to Plato. Trees and jellyfish have this same type of soul, because Plato defines soul as motion that moves itself. Nothing moves it, it moves itself. And so trees eat, they reproduce, jellyfish do the same, but that's it. They don't have anything else. Their soul is just appetite, epithemia. Above that, we have what they call thumos, or spiritedness. Spirited in the way that you have a spirited debate. It's like strong emotions, hot-blooded passions, the desire for glory and honor and victory. Its seat is the chest, specifically in the heart. And then if you're a human being and this part of your soul dominates who you are, then you're like a boxer or an athlete. If you want to think of a higher animal that has this faculty of the soul as well, think of a lion, for example, okay? And then the third and smallest part of the soul, it's the smallest, but it's the most dignified, and it's the most lofty. It's reason, what they call logos. Now, if you're dominated by this part of the soul, you're something like a philosopher or a wise man, who and the logos is lodged in the head, in the brain. So you can see it's this nice, neat three-part scheme. And then human beings are characterized by what makes us human is our possession of greater reason than the animals and the trees. And this reason, according to Plato and Aristotle, is a reflection of God, because God is a pure intellect and mind, with no desire, it doesn't move, doesn't change, it's eternal, and it's pure in that way. And we are closest to God because we have that same type of mind and reason. We share in it, not the same type. We're a lesser degree of it. And then that painting, which everyone has seen, is man reaching out for God. Michelangelo was a Neoplatonist. And so when he shows that God isn't a bearded man, that's actually a cross-section of the brain. So what Michelangelo was saying was man is fully man only when he uses what is best in him and exercises his intellect and his mind. Okay? It was a quick little breakdown. I could have gone a lot longer, but I'll make my point. Now we're in a position to answer, why is it bad that Kim Kardashian is the most famous Armenian in the history of the world? Because she's famous for nothing more than for what a tree can do. That's why. She's consumed by appetite, materialism, food, reproduction. But we share that with the lowest creatures, and not for anything higher and loftier and more godlike, which is the mind. So Baronian makes the same criticism, and I'll read it, and it's going to sound like I wrote it, but I didn't write it. This is from September 3, 1880. Baronian says this. Arranged marriages were still a thing in Constantinople at this time, and sometimes a matchmaker or an older relative would go to someone's house and look over a potential bride to see if she was fit for marriage. That's what he's describing here. Baronian says this: as you are all aware, the tradition of bridal viewing hasn't fully gone away in the capital. When they wish to take a bride, many young men behave how I behave when I want to buy a cow or a horse. Viewing the girl through the eyes of their relatives, they start negotiating if they like what they see. But if they don't, they go off to see another girl. They say back in the day, there was a custom where the girl would be examined in the bathroom to make sure her body was free of defects. Oh, how obsessed men are with physical appearances when it comes to marriage. Oh, men, you'll never become men. The bathroom of the soul is purgatory, but no one goes to purgatory to inspect their prospective wives' defects. Only those husbands with ugly wives want to send their wives to purgatory. Men are more materialistic than they are spiritual. In vain, theologians shout that the soul is greater than the body. Yes, that's what they say, the soul is greater than the body, but the body is more beautiful than the soul. And when it comes to marriage, they say that we require beauty more than greatness of soul. Oh, the stupidity. So remember when he called women grown-up children? Now he really let men have it for their defects. He's very impartial. Clergy, secular, male, female, young, old, he spares no one. He carries out that promise. Oh, I forgot that. That was there. Yeah, sorry. So do you see what his criticism was? His criticism was a criticism of the ultra focus on appetite to the exclusion of what makes us truly human. Another one. This is from what we're translating this year, from A Stroll Through the Streets of Constantinople. That's what we're translating this year. He's talking about the spirituality that some people exhibit in Constantinople. He says they're practically all spiritualists. They all drink brandy. With a pun on spiritual, yeah. Some say the residents, having fallen out with Demiurge, the local priest, have sworn not to set foot in the church. However, it's interesting that when Armenians get into a fight with a bartender, they never swear not to set foot into his bar. What is he criticizing?
Appetite.
Again, August 1, 1880. But the Armenians in the provinces are being robbed by Kurds at this point. And the Kurds just steal everything. Women, clothes, horses. In this case, they steal these Armenians' horses, and the Armenians send a letter to the Patriarch of Constantinople complaining about the Kurds having stolen their clothes. Baronian says the following: if a Kurd or a Circassian were to steal his clothes, they immediately dash off a telegram to the Patriarchate to send them clothes, simultaneously threatening to change their faith if their issue is ignored. Woe to the faith of the man which rests on his clothes. I'm not cherry picking. Every single one of his criticisms is on that level. All of them, without exception. August 11, 1880, we have our second act out. Mark and Jennifer are going to act this part out. Mark is the husband, Jennifer is the wife, they're an Armenian pair. They want to take a trip to Armenia. Go ahead guys, stand up, stand up. As you guys talk, I'll reveal their lines, just in case they're not loud enough.
Woman, give me your earrings.
What are you gonna do?
Why do you ask?
Why wouldn't I ask?
I'm gonna sell them, and we're going to Armenia together.
I'm not leaving here to go there.
But you've talked my head up on how we should go to Armenia.
But I didn't mean we should sell my earrings.
In other words, you love Armenia. You love your earrings more than Armenia?
What are you saying? Can I hang Armenia from my ears?
Baronian, at this point, he makes a very brutal comment. He's usually very urbane and very polite, but he says the following. Again, sorry, Women's History Month. But he says, if you ask me, women like this should have their ears cut off. He usually doesn't say things like that. But again, what's the criticism? Again, same thing. Material wealth over spiritual. June 2, 1880. The theater at that time, there was a popular idea that the theater was a place where they taught public morals. Okay, that's where he's coming from. I was convinced today that the theater is in fact a school for adults. But what do adults learn in that school? Herein lies the problem. Let others insist it is ethics they learn there. I insist that although lessons in morality are offered, the students receive lessons only in anatomy. For the audience pays more attention to the arms, neck, and legs of an actress than to the words she speaks. And if they find the actress's body parts beautiful, they say,
It was a very wonderful show.
poor authors. They think that their work is being applauded. Meanwhile, it's often the authors of the actress who are getting an ovation. What's being criticized? Again, November 3, 1880, I'm going to beat this into the ground. You're going to come over to my side on this. In all my life, Baronian says, I've never met an audience member who after the final act said to the person sitting next to them,
what beautiful speeches, what ideas and lovely pieces, what interesting scenery.
but in all my life, I've never heard a pious theater lover on their way out of the theater not say to his friend,
What a beautiful actress. What lovely eyes, what interesting knees.
It continues. In the capital city, Mrs. Hratch, this is who he's talking about. I found a picture of her. In the capital city, Mrs. Hratchia's eyes are more talked about than the Tower of Nel. And Hratchia's father, the author of that pièce, he uses the French there, is more well known than the author of the Tower of Nel in the theater world. It's enough that the two Kardashian sisters were famous actresses at that time, two sisters. It's enough that the two Kardashian sisters, or Miss Hratchia, or some other beautiful actress, or all of them together have roles in a play, comedy, or tragedy. No matter how bad, the theater will nonetheless be packed with spectators. And this is, the book contains caricatures, you've seen it. This is an original caricature of her. And so what's being criticized here? Again. And so here are the Kardashian sisters. That's their actual photographs. This is their caricatures in the book next to them. Here you have them. By the way, they're famous, as Baronian said, I'm not saying this, they're famous for having beautiful body parts, as Baronian says. Well, from the Kardashian sisters to the Kardashian sisters, total consistency. We're very consistent, I'll give us that. June 9, 1880. I noticed food has a big influence on people's opinions these days. I know someone who a year ago would talk about Armenian affairs all the time when he was getting by on bread and cheese, but now that he lives off steak, he ridicules those who talk about Armenian issues. you'll find here that we have bread and cheese for you after the, nothing fancy, but again, what's being criticized here? Pure appetite, unadulterated, uncut appetite. Last one, and this was, I think, the most important one. The entry of June 13, when I read it, I knew I was seeing something special. I was excited by it. June 13, 1880, borders on a scientific discovery. Baronian actually gives us a statistical model of the moral condition and the soul of the Armenian people by the numbers. He gives us numbers. Baronian compares, in this entry, he compares the number of base, appetite-driven pursuits with those dedicated to higher intellectual and spiritual activities. And though the numbers he gives are clearly exaggerated, I know that they're not exact, when a caricaturist, for example, if someone shows me as having a big nose, I won't get angry, or like a nose 7 times my head, I'm not going to say, that's wrong, it's 7 times my head, it's only this big. He's exaggerating the size of my nose to show that I have an already big nose. That's what Baronian is doing. So it's an exaggeration, but it's an accurate exaggeration to make his point. According to reliable statistical figures, the Armenians of Bodis today have 3,400 bars and 3 bookstores, 1,200 dance instructors and 5 Armenian language teachers, 2,000 lounges and 3 museums, 4,000 playing cards and 5 newspapers. And this survey is enough to reveal the moral state of the Armenians of Bodis. What is being criticized? Again, it's more of this. When I read this, immediately, when I saw 3 bookstores, by the way, I broke it down. I'm not a numbers guy, I'm bad at numbers, I can't add. But I wanted to break down the ratio. The bars to bookstores is 1,000 to 1. Dance instructors to Armenian language teachers, 240 to 1. Lounges, which was kind of like a casino/hookah lounge, where they go play cards mostly. So museums this is the actual math, 666 to 1. And then 4,000 playing cards to newspapers, 800 to 1. When I saw those books, that number of bookstores, I'm 41 now. When I started going around to bookstores in Los Angeles, I know how many bookstores there were when I was around that age. You could do this with the Armenians of Los Angeles. There was 169,000 Armenians in Constantinople at that time, around that time, 169,000. There was 166,000 Armenians in Los Angeles in 2000. And so, I don't know what the numbers are of the bars and dance instructors and museums, but it'd be interesting if you're a statistician to go in and look at it. Because I know from my own experience that there were 3 bookstores for the same number of Armenians. Abril, Bej, and Sardarabad. And it's still those. I think one of them closed down. Bej closed down, I think. So, it'd be interesting, again, there's a consistency of character here. So I went on this website called mybigfatarmenianlist.com, which is supposed to list Armenian businesses in Southern California. And again, I just did a quick little thing. This says education, that says catering, that's automotive, that's bakeries, that's food and restaurants. If you add up food, bakeries, and catering, the proportions are pretty close. What about the Armenians of Yerevan? I don't know the numbers there, but I went in and I filled in an infinity of bars and restaurants. I don't know what the other ones are, but it's a lot. It's probably the same. All right, a summary. Baronian's criticisms all center on Armenians' preoccupation with blind, short-sighted, short-lived desires to the exclusion of their higher faculties. He values higher spiritual and intellectual pursuits as opposed to lower physical pleasures. He does this not by positively recommending virtue, but in a negative way by ridiculing vice. And that's a time-honored method of satirists to get their point across. But this gets me into the last part of the... oh good, we're making good time. The last part of it. My ledger is mostly about politics. As I said earlier, he couldn't publish it in Constantinople or anywhere in the Ottoman Empire because it was a very political work that criticized the patriarch, Armenian patriarch, the Sultan's government, high-ranking Armenian figures, high-ranking Turkish figures. So he couldn't do it. So this is the reason why it's called hos-hos and he had to publish it in Georgia. because it's political. Now you might ask yourself, if it's about politics mostly, why did I go through that whole thing about the soul? What does the soul have to do with politics? And what's the emphasis on with the soul? Because contrary to what your average person, and unfortunately the vast majority of our countrymen think, now and have always thought, politics is not primarily about the following. It's not about economics. Sorry, Marxists. Politics is not about diplomacy. In the past 4 years, primarily about diplomacy. In the past 4 years after the disaster in Artsakh, I heard many people saying, we don't have diplomacy. We didn't properly conduct diplomacy. We're not good at it. No diplomacy. But it's not about diplomacy, I say. It's not about voting. It's not about tallying numbers. Politics is not about ruling cities. Politics, first and foremost, is about ruling yourself. That's what politics is about. The individual. If you can't rule yourself, you can't rule anything else. And that which rules in yourself must be the better part of yourself, which is your reason, over the lower part, the blind appetites. So when discussing politics, we are still in the realm of the soul, and I'll prove it. This is what Aristotle has to say. By human virtue, we mean not that of the body, but that of the soul. And remember, Baronian is concerned with virtue, but in an opposite way. And happiness also we call an activity of soul. But if this is so, clearly the student of politics must know somehow the facts about the soul. As the man who is to heal the eyes must know about the whole body also. And all the more since political science is more prized and better than medical. But even among doctors, the best educated spend much labor on acquiring knowledge of the body. The student of politics then must study the soul. Consistency there. So the international politics at that time. I'm going to break it down into international politics and internal Armenian politics. Baronian wrote this in 1880 in the aftermath of the Russo-Turkish War of 1777 to 1778. Russia won, along with its Balkan allies. It established a foothold in the Caucasus by taking over Kars and Batum. And at the end of that, the Ottomans were forced to the table where they signed, I'm sure some of you know this, they signed the Treaty of San Stefano in 1878. And then a few months later, they signed a treaty that altered the Treaty of San Stefano, called the Treaty of Berlin. Article 16 of the Treaty of San Stefano was neutered by Article 61 of the Treaty of Berlin, and here they are side by side. In the first one, the Russians would pull out of the eastern provinces of the Ottoman Empire only on the condition if the Ottomans made reforms for Armenians. In the updated version, in the Treaty of Berlin, the part about Russians staying until the reforms were enacted were taken out, and it left it up to the goodwill of the Ottomans to make these reforms and periodically make known the steps taken to effect these reforms. Suffice it to say, they dragged their feet, they never made the reforms, they lied, they did everything they could to put it off, and the reforms never came. And so this little difference in these two things had a huge effect on Armenian history because it left Armenians without any protection from anyone, from any of the great powers. And principally responsible for this was the Prime Minister of Britain at the time, Benjamin Disraeli, who Baronian mentions in his book. Baronian doesn't like him because he was particularly anti-Armenian and pro-Turkish. This is what Baronian says, September 10. Karakashian's geography was published recently. Karakashian is a geographer, Armenian. Mr. Karakashian had seen fit to place the cities of Mush and Van in Kurdistan this time around, whereas in the geography of 1866, he had located those cities in Armenia. What was the reason for those cities being transferred from Armenia to Kurdistan? From which geography book has Mr. Karakashian gotten his information? Lord Beaconsfield's geography, of course. Lord Beaconsfield is Disraeli. So the political question that he talks about most in this is the Armenian question, and I think a lot of us are familiar with it. So after the Congress of Berlin, the Armenian question comes about, of what are we to do with the Armenians trapped in the Ottoman Empire, being attacked daily by Kurds and Circassians with no help coming from anywhere, and Armenians were defenseless, and who was going to help them? This is where Hrynian Heidik made his famous Iron Ladle speech as the aftermath of the Congress of Berlin, where he said Armenians shouldn't rely on the goodwill of others or on paperwork for their salvation. They should take up arms if necessary, because he had just seen how Serbia and Bulgaria had gotten independence by taking up arms, not by waiting for a savior to come and save them. And remember, that comes back and it reasserts itself at this point. And so Baronian frequently complained that the Armenian question had taken a back seat to the Greek question, to the Montenegrin question, to the Bulgarian, to all the other questions, all came before the Armenian question. And so he's continually annoyed by it, but he's hopefully cautious, or cautiously optimistic. But still, the reforms never came. When it came to these so-called reforms, Baronian says the following. He imagines that the Turkish government says the following to the Kurds about these reforms, because the Kurds didn't want these reforms to happen. And so he imagines the Sultan saying this to the Kurds. Kurds, be at ease. You are free to rape the Armenians' property, life, and honor however you want, wherever you want. If once in a while you hear the word reform from our mouths, don't believe it. We use it to fool Europe. You go about your business and don't give it a second thought. The considerate Ottoman government holds you back from nothing. Previously, Ottoman reforms had guaranteed Armenians their life, property, and what is the third thing he says? And their honor. Those were supposed to be allowed to the subjects. But again, these reforms never went through. And this is at one point in the entry of September 4, Baronian reports that a Turkish newspaper was threatening that if reforms were to take place in Armenia, that, quote, the Kurds are going to slaughter and devour Armenians like chickens, close quote. This turned out to be quite prophetic. In another entry on August 7, Baronian states that this was the usual policy of the Turkish press, which was to, quote, first instigate, then pacify. All throughout Baronian's account, we get a view into also the British imperial politics at this time. The British Liberal Party was generally pro-Armenian, whereas the Conservative Party, which is Disraeli's party, was generally pro-Turk and pro-Kurd. The motivation of British conservatives seems to have been to strengthen the Turks and Kurds as a buffer against Russia, and to secure British interests. And then in one entry, in the entry of August 28, Baronian notes that the British Queen herself mentioned Armenians in a speech. Baronian writes, the Queen recalled that the great powers have communicated their recommendations on the reforms regarding Armenia to the Sublime Porte in hopes that the proposed goals will be met. And it's interesting, Baronian notes that a lot of Armenians in Boris got really happy at hearing their name in the Queen's speech, just like today. Oh, Macron said something, oh, they get happy. Oh, this person said something, they get really happy. It's the same thing happening over and over again. Again, there's a British liberal named Gladstone, and that's another British liberal named Bryce. He's in the book as visiting the Armenians, encouraging them, saying that they would have a state. But Baronian, in this late entry in my ledger, he has his hopes crushed. Because England is wavering, they're pulling out of Serbia, Serbia may go back to the Ottoman Empire, and everyone's worried about that because they seem not to care anymore, suddenly. So Baronian says this, these predictions made by English newspapers had the effect of discouraging those who had put all their hopes for freedom on England, despite the English Liberal Party having spoken very favorably on the Armenian question, and even the Queen having mentioned the plight of the Armenians in her speech. However, one should not forget that when interest speaks, memory fails, and men can't remember the promises they've made. And then this is the last part. This is on internal Armenian politics. This period in Ottoman history is called the Tanzimat era, the Reform era. In 1863, Armenians, in hopes of modernizing, drafted a constitution. Armenians who had been educated in Paris with liberal, representative, democratic ideas floating around in their heads, came back to Boris and they said, we need a constitution too, just like they have in Paris. And so they drafted one which limited the powers of the Armenian Patriarch and created a democratically elected assembly of Armenian representatives, which is called the Armenian National Assembly, again, which is mimicked from what these crafters of the Constitution found in Paris. Baronian has this to say about them. He says, August 23, they write from Samsun that on the 15th of this month, a woman supposedly gave birth to a child who was half man and half fish. They should have cut off the fish half, fried it and eaten it. A few hours after this monster was born, it died. I'm not so surprised at the birth of this monster, but I wonder about how soon it died. Why? The reason is this. How then does our National Assembly survive, which is 1/4 human and 3/4 parrot? Again on the National Assembly, July 9. Finally, the inauguration of the National General Assembly is going to take place this coming Friday, July 11. As is traditional, all representatives are invited to give empty speeches and fulfill their patriotic duty. July 18. The National General Assembly was convened again today. The Holy Patriarch was once again absent due to ill health. Many of the representatives were also absent due to good health. Only those with mild colds were present. And then this is the last two slides. Baronian, remember I said he uses Greek philosophers and philosophical ideas to make fun of people generally. He doesn't go too deep into it, but in this case, he talks about the Greek philosopher Anaxagoras, who said that he didn't believe in a vacuum. So he said there's no such thing as empty space. And Baronian takes that idea and he uses it to make fun of the National Assembly. Anaxagoras says there's no emptiness in nature. I say there is emptiness in nature. Don't think I'm contradicting Anaxagoras for the sake of contradicting him. I'm not a politician, thank God. What evidence does this Anaxagoras have to claim that there is no emptiness in nature? Has he never looked at the transcripts of our National Assembly to be convinced just how many empty words there are in nature? This aside, would Mr. Anaxagoras care to crane his neck a little and look into our government's treasury to see just how many empty coffers there can be in nature, especially coffers which were built for the purpose of being full? But Mr. Anaxagoras persists and repeats, there is no emptiness in nature, everything is full. Yes, it's full of emptiness. August 2. This is the famous Armenians' unwillingness to follow good advice and their desire to rule in every situation, such that if you have 10 people in a room, everyone takes charge. Based on the good news concerning the Armenian question, every Armenian in the capital is preparing to become governor of Armenia. I think it goes without saying that if Armenia is granted self-rule, each village will have 800 governors. All of us will be rulers and will be forced to import people from Europe to rule. And this is the last one. Yesterday I had said, these are different entries, brother. June 16. Yesterday I had said, in this world, it is the spirit of the time that does everything. Today I say, in this world, the Armenian government does nothing. The educational crisis, the economic crisis, and the monasterial crisis are all exactly where they were 20 years ago and will continue to be for the next 20 years. And then again, he brings in two Greek philosophers, Diogenes the Cynic and Zeno, who argued against motion. There was a time when a philosopher was arguing with Diogenes in an attempt to convince the Cynic that there was no such thing as motion, when the one who lived in a barrel, Diogenes, famously homeless, started walking and said to his opponent, I refute your arguments, meaning he walked away from him, and that was his proof that motion was possible. Without saying a word, he just walks away. If I had an opponent like Diogenes, I'd toss the Armenian government in front of him and say, I refute your arguments in turn, meaning he shows him something that never moves and never does anything. All right. Conclusion. Now what? My ledger and Baronian's work in general in his work. We have an accurate representation of Armenian behavior, east, west, north, south, diaspora, homeland, ancient, modern, everywhere at every time. When Baronian spoke earlier, by the way, when he spoke, that wasn't me, that actually was him. That's from his preface from National Big Shots, when he said, "I'm only a mirror, blame yourself, don't blame me." Those were his words. He actually was a mirror, and he showed us in my ledger and in all of his works, sometimes something we didn't want to see. However, we see him using these philosophical ideas and naming philosophers like Heraclitus, Diogenes, and Anaxagoras. But Baronian taught virtue in a purely negative way and never formulated a philosophy or gives us anything positive to follow. But that wasn't his job. He's a satirist. It's not his doing. People expect proposals or solutions, especially after this sort of criticism, so I'm going to give you a proposal and you can take it or leave it or whatever. Shortly after Baronian died, there was the Armenian massacres. Hundreds of thousands of Armenians died. Less than 20 years after that, millions were killed in the genocide. A century later, 120,000 Armenians were ethnically cleansed overnight, and there seems to be no end in sight. Nothing we've done in the past 30 years or 150 years since my ledger was published, or 300 years or 3,000 years seems to have worked. No amount of xenophilia, whatever form it might take, has done us the slightest bit of good. Now, if I were a scholar of a university, I would make a point so subtle here that no one would understand. Usually that's what happens when I listen to scholars. They don't comment on the world, they just describe it often. If I were a demagogue, like Yelishe Charens sometimes was, I would say, Armenian people, your unity is your one salvation. Is that ever going to happen? Yeah, is that going to happen? Baronian, in fact, in my ledger, he says the opposite of that. Baronian, remember, has no comfortable truths. He doesn't say with Charens, if only we can get united. Baronian says the following. At one point, he notes that 3 Armenian educational foundations had united into one entity with the goal of building schools in Armenia. But Baronian notes that those educational institutions had fared better when they were disunited. And so he says the following. Perhaps disunity too has its benefits. So I'm neither a scholar nor a demagogue. I'm, personally speaking, I'm either a satirist with philosophical inclinations or a philosopher with satirical inclinations. I'm not sure which one it is. So I have the following suggestion. First, we need a philosophy. Just like we answered the why is Kim Kardashian, why is it bad that she's the most famous Armenian in the history of the world? We need a philosophy to guide us into the future. Once we have a philosophy, we need something that we've, in the whole history of the Armenian people, 3,000 years, not one person has ever thought to themselves, I want to write laws. We need laws. There's one exception, but that exception proves the rule. Perhaps people here know who it is. I want to quote this from one of our own few philosophers, David Anhacht, David the Invincible. And this is what he says. Its subject, meaning philosophy, its subject is all things which exist, and its purpose is to know them, that is to say, to have knowledge of them, and through them become similar to God. As the Pythian oracle declared, addressing the legislator Lycurgus, who was the lawgiver of Sparta, for the first philosophers were also legislators. Quote, this is the oracle saying this to the legislator of Sparta. You have come to my smoke-filled temple, O Lycurgus. I hesitate. I do not know. Should I call you a god or a man? But nonetheless, I shall call you a god, Lycurgus. She said this not because she did not know what she should call him, but in order to show the affinity between the nature of a philosopher and that of a god. And that's from David the Invincible. So, when I say this, humbly, I say this very humbly, we need laws. Not rules, not regulations, not a constitution, either mimicked from Paris or dictated to by Aliyev, which is happening as we speak. Laws. The Babylonians have Hammurabi. The Indians have Manu. The Athenians have Solon. The Spartans have Lycurgus. The Romans have Numa. The Hebrews have Moses. Who's our lawgiver? So these laws, again, neither rules nor regulations, universal ethical laws. And these laws, like a plant, must be native to our soil and be suited to the climate and our culture, and suitable for the people for whom it's instituted. And a law is like a pair of pants. It has to be tailor-made. You can't wear someone else's pants. You can't follow someone else's laws. We have our own particular ways of doing things. This is what Aristotle, this is the last thing. This is what Aristotle says about laws. And it comes back to this thing. I'm tying it all up. Aristotle says the following: he therefore that recommends that the law shall govern seems to recommend that God and reason alone shall govern. But he that would have man govern adds a wild animal also. For appetite is like a wild animal, and also passion warps the rule even of the best men. Therefore, the law is wisdom without desire. And that's what I've been driving at this whole time. That diagonal line up, it's easy to draw, it's much harder to do, but this is what Baronian, as a satirist, did not say, but which he indirectly drives at in everything he wrote. This is the key to understanding the man and his work, who, though not a philosopher, was our greatest moralist by far. And finally, I'll say this: Xenophilia, or odarasiruchun, or what have you, is the extremist example of looking outside of yourself for answers. Whereas the answers to every problem, including all of the Armenian people's problems, I humbly say, past and present, is to be found where all answers are to be found, inside. Thank you.